All right, y'all. So, welcome back to another episode of True Talks. If you're tuning in for the first time, I am the creator and host, Trinice. And oftentimes I sit here and I have real conversations with real people about things that I think matter. So, hopefully, you guys will too and will return to see other episodes. We haven't been too long going video. So, these are uploaded on YouTube, but you still have the option of tuning into them on audio streaming platforms like Spotify, SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever you listen to your podcasts or audio. So definitely search True Talks on there as well. So we've covered a lot of diversity conversations already as it pertains to racism and different things we've had to, work our way through and talk about on this podcast with the George Floyd situation and Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and so many others who have been added to that list now. But today we're going to switch gears a little bit. I'm actually going to talk to Hasina, who is out of Peabody here in Nashville. She's actually the Assistant Dean of Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. And I want to just get her input and let you all learn about her as well. So I'm going to welcome her now to True Talks for the first time. How you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you for having me. I really am honored that you would ask me to to be part of your podcast.
Oh yeah, for sure. She and I
Yeah.
actually met up at Panera Bread way back pre-COVID, right? And
Yep.
we were planning this for a long time now. And so to see it finally happening, I'm excited. I
Yep.
think
Me
I
too.
think this is a great topic to cover, and it's a new audience that they can learn a little bit about why diversity and inclusion is important. And so if you want to get into who you are, what you do, what
Sure.
exactly your title requires you to do.
And that's ever shifting. I think certainly the renewed energy and of the Black Lives Matter movement has really shifted the way a lot of people are thinking about structural racism and the way it impacts just all of our systems, right? And particularly in education. And I think it's just been highlighted by COVID, right? The differences between communities that have internet and devices and their ability to support remote learning, and communities that are still struggling with the digital divide. So I think just all of the things that have happened over the past several months have just really highlighted the impact of structural inequality in a really visible way for people, that they can't, I think there's been a lot of denial happening, and people not necessarily thinking that it affects them. And I think the events of this past summer have really highlighted, no, it really affects all of us, and we all need to work together to come up with a solution. I think in Peabody in particular, students have been amazing in terms of finding their voice and advocating for the things that they want to see happen, both in classrooms and just across the university generally. And I think faculty are really responding to that. I think there's a lot of effort across Peabody to look at the curriculum and the things that are being taught in the classroom and how it's being taught. Particularly as we go to this weird hybrid model, right? So
Yeah.
a lot of our classes are going to be remote, some of them are going to be in person, and the idea of like, how do you make sure every student has the things that they need to be able to succeed, is really important. I think, we do have some courses, even Peabody is a school of education, so probably maybe not as much as the STEM classes, but we do have labs, right? And how do you do labs in a virtual environment? Some things are easier, some statistic classes or things that might be more computer based, maybe easier, but some things, you kind of need to be in person. And how do you do that in a way that really protects all the people involved? And we know that that's had a disproportionate impact on particular communities. And so the danger is real. And so I think Vanderbilt is doing its best to monitor that. And
Yeah.
we will see what happens,
Yeah.
but it's a big job for sure.
Yeah, because a significant part of Vanderbilt's student body consists of international students.
Right,
So
right.
how are they maintaining giving supplies to everyone that needs them?
Yeah, we're just so happy that um, the ICE ruling got overturned. And so
Yeah.
there was the point where Homeland Security said that if your university went completely online, that international students would be denied student visas and just couldn't come at all. And so that was a really difficult thing that's been overturned. And so that's great, but it's still really difficult because for students, they weren't able to get visas in time to be here at the beginning of class. There's a backlog of just having that happen and getting all the travel arrangements just to come to the United States, where they have to quarantine for 14 days, right? And so on their own dime. And so they have to, like, there are definitely barriers to coming. Um, and there are also barriers to staying, right? If they stay in their home country, there's often a big time difference. And so we have to think about classes in terms of how can they really participate. So a lot of faculty that do have international students are considering alternate times where so that international students can have an in-person session, as well as kind of videos and other ways to complete their course requirements. And a lot of faculty are really at Peabody have been amazing in terms of just setting time to talk individually with international students and just reaching out to make sure that they do have the things that they need to be able to succeed in the course. And it's just, you learn new things all the time. Like, Google does not exist in China.
Oh,
And so
wow.
like
I didn't know that.
so we can't like use Google Docs or Google Forms to work with our Chinese students. We have to use other platforms. I think uh, just internet connectivity is different in different countries, and just making sure that we are in contact with the international students has been a big part of the planning process.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
I didn't know that at all. So you shed
yeah,
light on
it's
something I would have never considered.
you learn a lot, right?
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting that we're having this conversation now, as it pertains to ICE, because before when we met up, we were talking about the travel bans because of ICE,
Right,
and the travel restrictions. But now there are travel bans because of COVID-19. And
right,
so, how are you guys getting students physically to the campus if you are deciding to open back up? Or again,
right.
I know you said you provide them virtual means of communicating with their professors, but how are you working around some of those restrictions?
So I think for all of the classes across Vanderbilt, whether at Peabody or in the other colleges and schools, there has to be a virtual option, just because not just for international students, but for students who can't come back to campus for health reasons. And so they are being very lenient on students who choose to study remotely for health reasons, and making sure that they have an alternate means of completing their coursework. For those who choose to come back on campus, for our undergraduates who are residential, staying on campus, they are making sure that they are socially distant, and putting kind of all of the precautions in place for making sure that they stay healthy in their residential spaces, including rethinking dining halls, rethinking classroom spaces, rethinking dorm spaces, and how many people can be in particular areas together. And so they've done a lot of work, but it is definitely going to be a different semester. Everybody knows that it's going to be a challenge. They have put like testing and contact tracing procedures into place for all of the different schools and colleges. And so they have tried to be very thoughtful in terms of the way that it's rolling out. I think there's still going to be challenges, right? And so it's
Mhm.
still, um, it's a tough decision to make whether you're going to be remote or in person, because it is different. And the learning that happens online versus in person is different. And so, as we make that adjustment, some places, I think, um, just given their course content and what's going on, will be more successful at that, and it'll be easier for some people to transition. I think it will be difficult for some places where it's necessary to kind of do labs or to have that face-to-face interaction. I think there is, uh, you know, there is the intention to be as accommodating as possible for student needs. And I think student access services, which kind of handles all the accommodation requests. So I think with COVID, it's not just if you personally have health conditions that might make you immunocompromised, but if you live with someone who might have health conditions that make them immunocompromised. So I think they are kind of trying to make sure that all of those issues are addressed. But it's just, it's a lot.
It sounds like it's a lot,
Yeah.
but it sounds like it's something they're handling digitally,
Yeah.
and making sure it makes sense and benefits everyone. Um, and so,
Yeah.
that's been something I've been thinking about, because we're hearing different campuses do different things. Like
Sure.
MTSU was one of the first ones who publicly said that they were going to open, and they never
Right.
really went in detail about what that looked like. And so
Right.
I knew that I could take the opportunity to ask you that, see how you all were approaching that process.
Yeah.
Um, Go
It's
ahead. What were you saying?
No, I was going to say, I mean, like, they have really mapped out all the classroom spaces to make sure that people are, um, 6 feet apart. They're kind of trying to make sure everybody wears masks and that they are disinfecting between classes. And, they have now kind of these one-way walking routes. So
Oh yeah, the
people,
limited
yeah,
amounts.
yeah. So that's an interesting thing to see. And so we're looking at this with no students here.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
when students get here is going to be the test of it, right? To see how the plan gets put into practice.
yeah.
But I think it's always going to be a challenge, because um, I think there is a deep desire to be with people again. And so I think it is hard to social distance, right?
Hmm.
And so I I we will kind of continue to look and see what's going to happen. And I think I just hope parents and students know that they can kind of share their concerns and ideas. I think a lot of students have great ideas.
Yeah,
I just learned so much from talking to students that and those need to be elevated. And so I always welcome parents and students sharing their thoughts and ideas,
yeah.
because that's how we advocate and create change.
Absolutely. And I got that sense from you when we first met up about, how to take ideas and put it into practice. And so, given the role that you served there, how do you think you listen to the students at Peabody and then put it into practice to include everyone?
Right. We have had several kind of town halls and listening sessions over the summer. I think a lot of it, I think it's, a mix of talking about COVID, but also talking about uh, anti-racism and ways to make our campus more anti-racist, and kind of using that language instead of just equity and inclusion, which seems to be more palatable, right? But once we
Hmm.
start talking about structural racism and anti-Black racism, people get a little bit nervous. But I think that students have really pushed for that and have really not just brought up resources, but brought up some great ideas. And I think faculty have kind of taken the lead in trying to put those things into practice. And so it's just kind of, for me, it's taking those ideas and suggestions and sharing it with administrators and faculty. And I think it takes time sometimes to see change happen, but I think a lot of the suggestions and ideas are things that we do want to implement and that we have been working on. So, I think Peabody has made concerted efforts, particularly in trying to recruit diverse students as well as diverse faculty to our campus, as well as kind of thinking about ways to integrate discussions about race and structural inequality into classrooms. So I think that is something that they've been working on a long time. I think there's still more to go. I think there's always more to go, but I think the discussions that we've had at Peabody have, I think, really encouraged faculty and administrators to think about how we could do a better job. What, not just like trainings, but more intentional like integration into all of our programming, right? So that it's not just a standalone course or a standalone training, but that it's really, we talk about how race impacts all of the things that we do in various different programming. And so I think that is definitely something that's going on right now.
Yeah, and I know when we met up, you were plugging the a lecture series that you all had
Right.
back in February.
Yeah.
Could you go a little bit more in detail about
Sure.
what that was and what you all got from it?
Right. We actually have a series called the Dean's Diversity Lecture Series. Our dean has kind of set aside funds to invite like renowned speakers from across the nation and even across the world to come and speak at Peabody. And this past spring, we had two amazing speakers. We had Dr. Naila Nasir, who is the president of the Spencer Foundation, and the Spencer Foundation provides a lot of grants for educational research, but her own research is on students of color and how they learn in school environments. And then we had Dr. Bettina Love, who talks about abolitionist pedagogy, and which is amazing. And both of the talks were really amazing. And I think not just hearing them speak, but afterwards we had kind of a lunch and learn series with two of our own faculty, Dr. Nicole Joseph and Dr. Luis Leyva, about how can we take what we learned from those talks and integrate it into what we're doing at Peabody. Because I think they brought up some really important points, not just for like K through 12 education, but also what does that mean for higher education spaces like we're in Peabody? Like, how do we think about abolitionist pedagogy and teaching in higher ed, and what does that mean? And I think it was great. It was great conversation. We had both faculty and students there, and just hearing the different experiences that students have had and how faculty perceive that and can work to change that was really powerful.
Yeah. And I mean, given all of the mass deportations that we're experiencing, I mean, after 9/11, we saw a mass wave, right? And now it seems like we're seeing the same thing. We have kids in concentration camps. We're hearing
Right.
reportings of abuse, and again, with the Black Lives Matter thing, there's so much going on. How do we cohesively address these issues, but make sure that, like on campus, such as what you're talking about, people who are trying to get better or have fled
Right.
from a country to, in hopes of establishing a better life, are able to do that. When we last talked, you were talking about incorporating more funding and grants and making sure that everyone has some type of representation at Peabody in a way to kind of get their means together, go to school. So how has that changed since we've last met?
That's a great question.
It's a loaded one, but yeah.
I mean, I think the desire to do that is still there. It's just
Yeah.
much more difficult because of COVID. I mean,
Okay.
I think one of the big things with COVID, the way it happened really hit the university. I mean, like I am 100% sympathetic to the student side, but I also see kind of the university and staff side, right? Like when you give all of the refunds to the students, which they absolutely should have done, that means that there, is less income for the university, which means there's less income to pay staff, right? And so, we that balancing act between like being fair and equitable to students and being fair and equitable to staff is a tough one. And, there were a lot of layoffs at Vanderbilt because of COVID, which I think we don't really talk about, because when you do try to make adjustments for what students are paying, that means that income is not there for staff. And so and I think that was really painful. Personally at Peabody, some of the people that were people that I really care about, and are there other alternatives to providing funding for them? I wish that the Board of Trustees would think about what those might be, what might be alternate ways to make sure both our staff, faculty, staff, and students are have the things that they need, particularly financially, to be able to thrive in this environment. But I know that is a really tough conversation, and I know it's made even tougher by the fact that the numbers are so large, right? We have a huge number of students, we have a huge number of staff, and trying to manage the finances for that is like above my pay grade. Yeah. But we definitely are trying to do the best we can by both groups of people, but it's just, I think, seeing both sides of the story, right? I think it is a tough decision to make as to how the finances work out. I think Peabody is still kind of is committed to making sure that we do have funding for students from underrepresented groups to be able to be at Peabody and to graduate from our programs, but it's going to take a while. And I think with kind of the way COVID is going, it might be longer than we hope, but I do think that there are people who are working to mitigate that as much as possible.
That's all you can hope for at the end of the day, because it's already a big task, and then you add something like COVID onto it. It only makes things a little bit more difficult. Well, hey, I want you to spend time talking about, your history and what community you're part of and how that relates to the way you choose to serve the students on campus.
Sure. So I was actually born here in the US, in New York, to parents who immigrated from Bangladesh. And so I, have kind of that dual heritage of growing up with Bengali culture, but as kind of growing up in Nashville, because my parents moved down to Nashville when I was like 3. So Nashville is really my home, and has been my home for the last 40 something years. Not exactly tell my age, but
hey, as long as you don't look it, it's fine. Go ahead and shout it out.
Thank you. But it's an interesting experience growing up in the South. My parents are both kind of conservative religiously, so we shared a lot of values with our friends and neighbors, but also always felt different, right? Like whenever I went to school, you knew when they came to my name because the teacher would just pause and look around. And I don't think Hasina is a hard name, but it's different. And so you always knew. I was like, yeah, I'm here. Yeah. And so, you always felt like a little bit different. And Nashville has changed significantly since I grew up kind of in the 80s, and much more diverse now. But and definitely not just my Bengali heritage, but growing up Muslim, I started wearing the scarf when I was about 12. And so, was always kind of very visible in many of the spaces that I was in. But really, I think that didn't become an issue until after kind of, maybe a little bit with the Gulf War, but really after 9/11, and just the many negative stereotypes that kind of became part of just our social environment about Muslims as terrorists, as being violent, as being oppressive to women. All of those things just really like exploded after 9/11. And I think it just kind of changed the way people treated you and the way you interacted. And, you know, I was actually pregnant with my second son when 9/11 happened, and it was really interesting, like just the difference between how other people treated my older son, who was born pre 9/11, and you
Mm-hmm.
know, people in the South, when they see babies, they're like, "Oh, how cute," and you know, are
Yeah.
very friendly and kind of outgoing, but not with my second son, who was kind of, once they saw the scarf, they weren't quite as friendly and quite as outgoing. So, and I think, you know, this is kind of, I think one of the things we talked about is microaggressions. You don't like
Yeah.
really know why things are happening, but you think that's why it's happening, because I am visibly Muslim because I wear the scarf. And so, you know, that just started happening a lot after 9/11. Just, you don't know why, but people treat you differently. People aren't as friendly. People don't talk as much. You know, I think it's shifted a lot since then, but I think there is definitely still a lot of misconceptions and misperceptions about the Muslim community in general. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a lot.
Yeah, I know. I know. I like to get people's input in, especially people who are in a part of a different community than I am, and because I mean, for the most
Right,
part, greater good of humanity, we all in one community, but it's good to have those
right,
stories get told rather than me sit here and tell you what your life has been like. That's part of the problem, right? And so what do you feel like needs to happen in order for people to gain a better understanding of who Muslims are as individuals and how they would prefer to be treated?
right. I mean, I think I think there's a couple of things that happen. I think, you know, when I talk about Islam, I ask people, what percentage of Americans do you think are Muslims? And you know, just to give them a frame of reference, do you think it's 10%? Do you think it's 7%? Do you think it's 1%? So I'm going to ask you, Trinice, what
What do I
percentage of?
think? I think it's
Uh,
larger than what we perceive, but I would go with 10%.
it's actually 1%.
One? Wow.
Yeah, I know. It just right. Yeah, it
And
it
it
like
and
people.
it's a good point because the media
Yeah,
is always plastering it everywhere.
right,
Right.
right. So and there's kind of like implications that Muslims should be doing a lot, should be out. You know, we're 1% of the population.
Yeah.
And we're very diverse, right? I think, especially in Nashville, like we have a huge Kurdish population, we have a huge Somali population, we have African Americans who
Lebanese.
have been Muslims for generations, actually,
Mhm.
and I think Muslims in America for generations. And so I think people don't know just how diverse the stories of Muslims in America really is. I think, and that we are all very different, right? Like, I'm one of five sisters. I'm the only one that wears the hijab or head covering. And, you know, we all love each other and get along. It's not a, you know, it's not a problem. But, you know, I think that there's a perception that we're all very conservative, um, and have a very narrow worldview.
Yeah.
And you know, that's part of the community, right? That there's this whole spectrum of people and their beliefs. But I do think that one thing that people don't realize is that I think a lot of Muslims really think of themselves as religiously conservative but politically liberal, and so they do tend to be more social justice oriented. And I think in some ways it's kind of akin to Catholicism and kind of the social justice focus of a lot of Catholics. I think that's really similar in Islam, that there is a huge percentage of Muslims that are very social justice oriented. And so I think uh, that dichotomy is not one that is well understood,
Hmm.
um, in terms of, for a lot of people who are religiously conservative, they tend to be politically conservative, and who are religiously kind of more progressive tend to be politically more progressive. And so the fact that we could be religiously conservative and politically progressive
Yeah.
is kind of a disconnect for people. And so, yeah.
Yeah. And I think when we met up, I expressed to you that I've only known, Black Muslims, and you were one of very few that I've dealt with outside of like even just the Black community. And so my
Right.
assumptions, if I had any, which I don't think I gave you the impression I had any
Right.
assumptions, because I'm pretty much an open book. I sit before people and listen to them and let them tell me and describe to me who they are and who they'd like to be perceived as, and so
Right.
I didn't have any assumptions, be quite honest with you, but I'm just upfront and honest about the fact that I have limited experience with people who are, outside the Black community dealing with a different type of religion. And so when I sat down with you, I was there open ears to learn. And I think that at base, that's what a lot of
Right.
people need to do. Quit coming in with these stereotypes and assumptions and just listen. If there's something you want to ask, ask.
Right.
Think about the way you frame your
Yeah.
questions, but because you never want to be offensive. But I think that most times it's a learning opportunity that we miss. And that's that gray area where we give life to things that we shouldn't, the stereotypes, the microaggressions. And so if I can
Right.
encourage anybody tuning into this, get with somebody you don't know and just listen, and actually, if you go to
Absolutely.
my previous episode, you'll see where me and Daniel Levin talked about that very same thing. And I mean, that's right now, this time in America sheds light on the fact of how important it is for us to do that. We can leave
Yeah.
COVID-19 a whole lot better if we just take the time out to really learn about people. People, no labels, nothing that we subscribe to in our identity, just people. Like, ooh, let's put this to rest. All of the isms. We should be tired by now of, seeing so many public lynchings, what I classify as public lynchings and, discriminatory actions from a legislative standpoint when we have the opportunity on a local level to treat each other as individuals and grow from there. And so, Hasina, I'm so happy that we had this discussion. I'm glad that this day is finally here and I'm able to have you as the guest.
Love that. That what you just said is just,
Yeah.
yeah. Thank you.
Hey, no problem. No problem.
Yeah.
We'll have to do this again sometime, chap it
Yeah.
up about something else,
Yep.
more lighter, I guess. But guys, I just wanted to give y'all the opportunity if you are attending Peabody this year, or any campus, be mindful that COVID-19 is still out there. You need to practice social distancing, follow any guidelines that the campus is putting in place so that you can protect not only yourself but others. Let's flatten the curve and get rid of this thing so we can get back to socializing. The greater good of
Yeah.
humanity is interconnection. We're not able to do that if everybody's isolated in quarantine, but we can't rush back into that life without safety being the number one priority over anything else. So did you have anything else you want to add to this conversation, Hasina?
I think, thank you. And please, I think to the point of, we had made before, if you need anything, please reach out. I mean, I think, the willingness of people to help right now is amazing. And so I think that, don't think that even if we're socially distant, you don't have to go it alone. I mean, we want to help and we want to work with people. And so I just would encourage people to just reach out. Yeah.
Got you. All right. And where can they find you? Are you on social media or you want to plug something to Peabody?
I am.
All right.
Yeah, the Peabody EDI is, just look up Peabody EDI and you should find our office and can connect with me. I am on Facebook and LinkedIn. I'm not as social media savvy as I probably should be, but I'm working on it.
All right. It's all we can ask of. Hey guys, like I always leave y'all, find me everywhere at Urban Thread 615 and be blessed in every day that God gives you. Your life is full of purpose. Until next time, deuces.